Morning. Hope all of you are doing well. We're learning Maseches Megillah, Daf Amud Beis, and Daf Vav Amud Aleph. And then in Mir Hashem, Sunday morning, we'll learn a blot and a half of Vav Amud Beis and Zion. A lot of ground to cover over there. A lot of this is Agadata and moves quickly. Bottom line of Amud Aleph is where we're going to be starting from. Let's get started. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Nata Netia B'Purim. Rabbi actually planted a sapling on Purim, top of Amud Beis. The Rachatz Bekrona Shalti Puri, and he washed himself in the marketplace, in some bathhouse in the marketplace. B'Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Wow, on a fast day proper. Rashi here indicates that he wanted to basically show that this day should not have been kept. Not only that, Ubikishlak or Tisha B'Av Lo Hodulo. He wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av as we know it, and they would not agree to him. What's going on here? Amar Lefanov, after the story was told, Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda said, "You got the story wrong. That's not correct. Rabbi Lo Hala Lo Kachayamai said this is not what happened. Tisha B'Av Shechalios B'Shabbos Hava. That year Tisha B'Av had fallen out on a Shabbos, V'Dachinu La'achar Shabbos, and they pushed it off until after Shabbos. It was a nidche, so the fast for Tisha B'Av had fallen out on a Sunday. Amar Rebbe had said, Hoel v'nidche yidche. Once the fast has been pushed off from the 9th, we should push it off. In other words, there should be no case of a nidche for Tisha B'Av. Just skip it. If it falls out on Shabbos that year, then it falls out on Shabbos that year, and there's no fast at all. For the Chachamim would not agree to him. Now, the person who started this story, which was Rabbi Elazar, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, said, "Thank you so much for qualifying the story that I thought I had. I was wrong. You qualified it. Kari alei tovim hashnayim min ha'echad. Better to have two than to have one. You, who were the second person to tell me a story, you heard my story and you corrected me. I'm appreciative. You made sure that my story was corrected. So thank you very much for that." Says the Gemara, the Rebbe, Heichi not sanatia b'Purim. How is it that he was allowed to plant something on Purim? That's not so simple. Rav Yossi says that when the pasuk in the Megillah says Simcha Mishta B'Yom Tov, how do we understand each of these three phrases from the pasuk in the Megillah? Simcha refers to Malamid Shasur Behesped, that Ein Yod Daled, no one is allowed to do Hespedim. Mishta, the pasuk when it says Mishta is Malamid Shasur B'Tainis, it's not a day to do fasting. These are typical things for holidays that were found in Megillah's Tainus, as we learned about in the previous Masechta. And in regards to Purim, we have the other phrase of the Yom Tov. What does that mean? So the question assumes that there's some form of prohibition of activity on Purim. We don't do that. We'll see why we don't do this, why we don't keep this. So says the Gemara, but again, in this phase, we assume it to be true. Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, a little bit less. Ella, Rebbe Bar Arbe Sahab. Rebbe lived in an ear, not in a village, not in a village that would be Yom HaKnisa, and not in Mukaf Choma that would be done on the 15th or on Erev Shabbos, however it would play out. Rebbe was a Bar Arbesa, he was a 14th person. That's when he should have lain. But and he planted the sapling on the 15th. So no big deal. Says the Gemara, that's not true. And we know this part. Rebbe Rebbe lived in Tveria. Tveria, says the Gemara, so he wasn't a 14th Jew. How could he have planted it on the 15th? He lived in Tveria. In Tveria, they planted, in Tveria, they laid the Megillah on the 15th. So that doesn't make sense. So therefore, the Gemara flips it and says, you're right that there is a prohibition of doing some kind of malacha. You're right. And how did he plant his sapling? He was a 15th Jew, and he planted it on the 14th. And asks the Gemara a side question on the side question. Are we 100% sure that Tveria is a city that was Mukaf Choma, and therefore its day is the 15th of Adar to read the Megillah? We know that Chizkiah, Kari Be'ar Beisar, Uvechar Beisar, that he had read the Megillah on the 14th and on the 15th. Why? Because Mesavkale, Imukefes Choma Mimos Yoshua Ben Nun Hilo. We weren't sure what day it was, so he read the Megillah on 2 days. Lechizkiah Mesavkale, so the Gemara responds that don't worry. For Chizkiah, he knew, and the Rebbe Pshitale, Rebbe So the Gemara answers, L'chizkiya misafkale, it was in doubt for Chizkiya. However, the Rebbe Pshitale, Rebbe knew the answer. Says the Gemara, even if it was pasha to Rebbe, that city was Mukaf Choma, that Tveria was Mukaf Choma, even if that's true, Mishari, would he have been allowed to plant that sapling on the 14th? Not true. In Megillah's time, it writes as follows: It's Yom Arba Asar, this Yom Chamisha Asar, both the 14th and the 15th. Yomei Puraya, both of them are the days of Purim Inun. They are. Delola Misped Bahon, those are days that you're not allowed to be masped. So we see that Purim really spans 2 days. And what this brisa in Megillah's Tainus is doing is interconnecting the 2 days. Whatever's usher on one is usher on the other. So if you say that it's usher to plant the sapling on any of the days, either the 14th or the 15th, it will be usher on both. So even if it's clear to Rebbe that Tveria was a city that's Mukaf Choma, so what? It's still prohibited to plant the sapling. Says the Gemara, no, that brisa from Megillah's Tainus Hanimili is behesped of a Tainus. That was only true by Hespedim and fasting, that on the 14th and 15th, whatever the halacha was on one, it was on the other. Aval malacha, when it comes to malacha, Yom Echad V'Sulo, that only applies to 1 day, and that is the day that you lane, whatever day that is. Says the Gemara, is that true? We're halfway down on Hamid Bates. Rav saw a particular man who was dropping flax seeds on Purim and he was cursed. This person was cursed, and what he planted did not grow. Says the Gemara, no, it's only 1 day, but he planted it on the wrong 1 day. So if he was a 15th and he planted on the 15th, yeah, then Velatia, then you got the curse, and then your flax is not going to grow. Hasam bar Yoma, that was the 1 day he shouldn't have planted. He's Mukaf Choma, he planted on the 15th. He should have planted on the 14th. But we really only hold that there's only 1 day of Malacha and Purim. Says the Gemara, Rabba Bereded Rava Amar Afidatim Biyome. You could even say that he planted it on his own day. That when people were accepting upon themselves the halachos of Purim, they accepted upon themselves hesped v'tainis, but malacha lo kabilu alayhu. But the actual malacha they did not accept upon themselves. You can see a little daled there on the word malacha and the phrase malacha lo kabilu alayhu, and this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch because malacha lo kabilu alayhu, we never accepted upon ourselves any restriction of malacha. So we know that the halacha is that we did not accept malacha upon ourselves. To meikar ksiv, initially the pasuk quote in the Megillah, simcha mishta v'yom tov, 3 things, simcha mishta and yom tov. Well, the sof ksiv, only 2 of them. At the end it says la'asos, so somebody made mishta v'simcha. V'hu yom tov lo ksiv. Even within the Megillah, we see that they were not going to accept the malacha upon themselves. Rav, if that's true, that there was nothing that was done that's wrong, why did Rav curse that person's flax? By time Lahu Gafa, says the Gemara that in his case it was Dvarm Hamutar V'achiru Nagu B'han Itzer. In that particular person's place, it was mutter to do malacha, but everyone had accepted upon themselves not to do malacha, and he was the guy who was rebelling. So Rav says that's not right. If there's a minhag makom, you have to keep it. And if you think you're going to succeed in planting your flax on a day when there's a minhag to not do malacha, you're wrong. However, Upe Asrei de Rav lo nahuk, but in the Rebbe, Upe Asrei de Rebbe lo nahuk, in Rebbe's locale, there was no problem with doing malacha on the day. There was no minhag, and therefore, as the sugya started on the bottom of the previous page, that he planted a sapling, completely mutter, no isra malacha whatsoever, unless there's an otherwise stated minhag. There's no malacha on Purim. The Gemara continues 5 lines before the wide lines on Ham and Beis. Some say really, it's not true. Really, it was a day of minhag for Isra Malacha for Rebbe. However, no problem. The Rebbe Netiya Shel Simcha Nota. He was planting a Netiya Shel Simcha. We learned about this in Maseches Tainus, and here's the repeat. It's not. once one passes through a course of fast days and the rain has yet to start, as we learned about last Masechta. So then once things reach a certain level of severity, we have to reduce our business interactions, binyan and building, uvinatia and planting, uve'erusin, uvenisun, and for marriage. The Tani Allah, we learned the Brisa in connection with that Mishnah that said, binyan shal simcha, that when we talk about building, that's talking about a binyan shal simcha, netia shal simcha. Ezo binyan shal simcha. What's considered a building that is a building of simcha? Building a canopy for a child's wedding. Discussion about what this is, a tree of some kind, maybe a small little gazebo, but basically that's considered a binyan shal simcha, and that would have been mutter even in a place where there was a minhag to not do malacha. Either way, one way or the other, Rebbe got out of it, and he was able to plant that sapling. The Gemara picks up on a line, and we'll spend a little bit of time analyzing whether or not, what city actually was Tveria called by Tanakh. We'll get through a bunch of psukim now to understand this a little bit better. 2 lines before the wide, 2 lines into the wide lines, Hamid base. Gufa. Chizkiah kari b'Tveria be'ar beso v'char meisar. We had already said that Chizkiah read the Megillah on both the 14th and 15th of the month of Adar, because he wasn't exactly sure when. He wasn't exactly sure whether or not it was Mukaf Choma. So says the Gemara, was there any doubt whatsoever in regards to the city of Tveria? How could there be any doubt in regards to the city of Tveria? After all, the pasuk says, Rekas v'chineres. V'kaim, the way we understand this pasuk is Verekas, that is Zot Tveria. The reason why we were in doubt wasn't because of the city itself, but because one of the sides of the city was a bank. It was a water bank. Tveria, as we know, is up against a body of water, up against the Kinneret. So Yehachi says the Gemara, there's no suffix at all about the city of Tveria. We know that it's not considered a wall, because in the halachos of Bate Ari Choma, about cities that will go back to their original owners in the times of Yovel, so we have a parameter about that not being a wall. The Tanya Asher Lo Choma V'Lo Shor Yigir, it can't be a row of houses, that doesn't count. And Saviv, what does the word pasuk Saviv mean when discussing Bate Ari Choma? Prat Letveria Sheyama Chomasa. We know for sure that that's not considered Mukaf Choma. So there should have been no doubt by Chizkiah whatsoever about that day. Says the Gemara, bad answer. Lenyan Bateri Choma, I agree that in regards to Bateri Choma, in establishing how we would define a wall for the purpose of returning a city to its rightful owner in the Yovel year, you got it. But that's just not so simple. We don't know exactly whether or not it's appropriately considered a wall or not for Mikra Megillah. And let's dig a little further. My prasim, my mukafim d'chsive gabe Mikra Megillah. How do we understand this? The unwalled cities and the walled cities. How do we look at them? Says the Gemara as follows. Do we say that mishum dahani miklu v'hani lo miklu, that since some have opened walls of some sides of the city that are not open and some are not open, the high nami miglia, and this city, because it is still open, it's open to the water, because one of its walls was the bank of the Kinneret. So then the Kinneret is going to make it so that wall is not a wall. And therefore we read the Megillah on the 14th, it's not Mukaf Choma. Odilma in Svara, I could have applied another way to look at the city of Tveria. Maybe Mishum Dahani Mignu Vahani Lo Mignu, that some city that's Mukaf Choma is protected, and the city that is not Mukaf Choma is not protected. But in this case, Beha Nami Mignia, but Tveria was protected because it had a wall everywhere but the water, and the water wasn't a common place for the enemies to join, and therefore Mishumachim Mesapkalim. So the Gemara leaves Tveria as a little bit unclear in regards to whether or not it was Mukaf Choma as it relates to Mikra Megillah, but correct in regards to Bate Ari Choma, in regards to the definition of a wall, as it relates to cities that go back to their owners during Yovel. You're absolutely right, it is not considered a home. 4 lines from the bottom. Rav Asi Kari Megillah b'Hutzal be'Arbei Saru v'Chameisar. In the city of Hutzal, Rav Asi read the Megillah on 2 days. Why? Because the Safkale Imukefes Choma Mimos Yeshua ben Yoneva wasn't sure if it was Mukaf Choma from the times of Yehoshua. And he could, some say a little bit differently. Amar Rav Asi, Hutzal the base Binyamin, Hutzal, which is in the Shevit of Binyamin, Mukefes Choma Mimos Yeshua. He said directly that it is. Okay, so he's not sure about Beis Hutzal. On the bottom line, the Gemara tells us something a little bit about the childhood of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ki havina talia. When I was a little tle, a small little lamb, when I was a young child, I had said something and I had asked it to some of the greats, turning to the top of Vav Amud Aleph, and it turned out that I was right. And what is it that he had learned? So he had learned that in the pasuk that we spoke about on the previous page, that Hamas zu Tveria. Hamas is Tveria, says the Gemara. Lama nikra shma Hamas. If Tveria is the name of the city, why was it nicknamed Hamas in the pasuk? Al shum Chame Tveria. Chame Tveria is well known, spoken about in the Maseches Shabbos and many other places, about these very warm springs, very warm natural springs. And the pasuk also speaks about a city called Rakas, and Rakas zu Tzipori. Mishum Timidlia Kirikta Dinara, because it was raised off of a bank, and then the city was raised off the ground, and it looked like the bank of a river. And Kineres zu Ginosar. Why was Kineres referred to as Ginosar? So it says the Gemara of Kineres, the Mitike Pira Kikala de Kinri. Just very, very flavorful fruits. I mean, we know the Peiros Ginosar are referenced throughout Shas as well. Amar Rava says 6 lines down on Vav Amud Aleph. Amar Rakas Lav Tveria. Could anyone possibly say that Rakas is not a reference to Tveria? When people would die in the city where Rava lived, Hasam Sapte Lehachi, over there, here outside of in Eretz Yisrael, here's how they would be masked by the person. Gadol hu b'Sheshach, he was a great person in the city of Sheshach. V'shem lo berekes, referencing, of course, someone who died in Tveria. So obviously Tveria is rekes. We have a Maaseh that actually indicates as much. Says the Gemara, and continues the story. When an Aron would go there, an Aron would go to Eretz Yisrael, the people who were Yoshvei Rekes, when people left from Tveria, come take the people who live in the valley. When he died, Pasach Alei Hahusaptana, there was a eulogizer, and he said as follows: Eretz Shinar Hara V'Yalda Eretz Tzvi Gila Shashuel Oina La Amra Rakas Ki Avda Kleichem Dasa. Rakas lost one of its Kleichemda, and that was a reference to people who lived there. So therefore, we see that Rakas has to be Tveria, not like Rabbi Yochanan said at the top of the page. Lama Rabba Chamas Zo Chamegrar. Chamas in the pasuk was not referring to Tveria. It was talking about the hot springs of Grar. Rakas Zo Tveria, like this new recommendation, is that Rakas is talking about Tveria because we saw all of the Hespedim were that way. We're referring to Tveria as Rakas, and Kineres Zukinosar. And Bolama Nikla Shema Rakas. Why was Tveria referred to as Rakas? Says the Gemara, because even though their lowliest people were filled with mitzvos kirimon. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Rakas Shema. Really, the city's name is not Tveria. Really, the city's name is Rakas. Why was that city's name called Tveria? It's sitting in the navel belly button of Eretz Yisrael, the center of it, not physically, but a central part of Eretz Yisrael. Rava Amar Rakas Shema. No, really, the name of the city. Rava Amar Rakas Shema. Yes, the name of the city was Rakas. But Lama Nikra Shema Tveria. Why was it nicknamed Tveria? Says the Gemara, Shed Tova Re'iyasa. It has beautiful views. So Tveria, Tovra. He was able to see good things. Next, another city to analyze. Amar Zeira, we're about a third of the way down, 4 lines into the wide lines of Amud Aleph. Zeira says Kitron, the city of Kitron, referred to in the pasuk in Sefer Shotim Zot Tzipori. Tzipori. Why was it called that way? Shiur Sheves Barosh Har Kitzipor. It's sitting on top of the mountain, much like a bird, likes to perch itself on very high heights. Says the Gemara, Kitron Tzipori. Disagree. Kitron is not Tzipori. It seems that Kitron was in the chelik of Zvulun. The pasuk says Zvulun lo horish. He did not inherit as Yoshvei Kitron as Yoshvei Nahalo. It was not in his Shevet, but Tzipori was. Kitron was in the Chelek of Tzipori, and we have to understand how to understand this pasuk. Zvulun was upset. Zvulun Yisrael Amidos of Hava. He was upset about the portions of Eretz Yisrael that he got. Shenamar Zvulun Am Cheref Nafsho Lamus. He was complaining about this to Hashem. Matam. Why was Zvulun upset? Mishum de Naphtali al Merome Sadeh. Naphtali had received portions that were all fields. So once he saw that Naphtali had received some of the fields, come on, to my brother, Nasata Lohem Sada. You gave them fields and you gave them vineyards. And me, you gave me mountains. They got land and I got water. Who can live on water? What do you want me to do? Everybody needs you. There's a silver lining to where you live, and that is the tchelas. The chilazon, of course, was the well-known small little mollusk that was used. There was a little gland inside of it, and they would extract the liquid from it to help make the dye for chilazon. So you're sitting on a cash cow. You should enjoy what you have. Shema Emar, the pasuk says, "Amim har yikro usfune tmunecho." And Tani Rav Yosef, sfune is zeh chilazon. Tmune is zeh taris. Taris is that the waters had a lot of tuna fish in them. And chol, what kind of sand was that? Zozechuches levana. This was a white type of sand that turned into a glass when it was heated properly. Amar lefanav Ribono Shalom mimol yeni. Who was here to tell me? Some of them, of course, explain that this is referring to the fact that anyone could take from any beach and make the sand, and they can catch fish. He doesn't control every fish in the sea. It says the Gemara, Amar lo, Shan yizbechu zivchet tzedek. What does that mean? The pasuk is explained as follows: Siman zeh yavach, kol hanoto mimcha b'lo damim. Anyone who takes anything from you without money, eino mo b'prakmat yashalo klum. And says the Gemara, they will not benefit from it financially at all. So no one's gonna benefit from stealing from you. So you don't have to worry too much about that. So says the Gemara, had it been that Kitron, it was Tzipori, the city of Tzipori, there's no way that he would have complained about it. So says the Gemara, Amai Misraim Amidosa. That would have been exactly what he would have wanted. There's no way that Kitron could be Tzipori. If you want to say that maybe Tzipori was lacking the famed Zavas Chalav Udvash, which is referring to animals that have a lot of milk and access to a lot of honey, I saw in Tzipori that there was a lot of these resources. 16 by 16 mil, that's a huge piece of property. And yet the implication, of course, it's exaggerative. But the point is that there was a lot of Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, nothing to worry about, all is well. Says the Gemara, that it wasn't as large as his brother's property. That's also not true. Esrim utartin parsa urka, upusia shisa parsi. It was a huge piece of property. So therefore that can't be the case either. It says the Gemara that afilu hachi, even if it were to have been true that he would have had Tzipori in his region, he still would have complained. He still would have been upset, even though in and of itself it would have been ideal. But he was a farm guy. He wanted many acres of property that was for him to grow things. And that was not Tzipori. Tzipori was a residential area, it was a metropolis. There was a lot of people there. It says over there, a reference in the pasuk that he was on Merome Sadeh, that he went up into the field. Anyways, Shmami, the Gemara concludes that Kitron is in fact Tzipori. One more little sugya, and then we will stop. Amar Rabbi Abba ve'ekron te'aker. What does that pasuk mean? So Kesari bas Edom. It's Kesari, the daughter of Edom. She Yosheves ben hacholos. Yaisa yaset kol Yisrael b'yamei. She lived on the sand. It was a city by the sand, which is Caesarea, and it was a stronghold for the Yevanim during that time, during that awful time for the Jewish people, one that we just celebrated victory from during Hanukkah. When the Beis Chashmonai won, they renamed it to Achidas Migdal Shir, the stronghold of song. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, what does the pasuk mean when it reads, "Vasirosi damav mipiv v'shikutzav mibein shinav v'nishar gam hu Elokeinu"? What's pshat in that pasuk? Vasirosi damav mipiv, that they remove the dam, the blood from their mouth. Is that base? This was a certain type of avodah zarah. V'shikutzav mibein shinav, the disgusting parts that were in their teeth. What was that referring to? That was talking about Zebes Galia Shalahem. That was talking about another type of avodah zarah. And Sefer Zechariah continues, what did it mean that there were things that were left over that weren't avodah zarah in this location in Sefer Zechariah? There were certain places that even though Jews were not in charge of the land at that time, but they still left over some of the shuls and Batei Medrash. And the pasuk continues, Ekron Kibusi, what does that mean? Elu Teritarios Vikarkasios, these are theaters and these are circuses that over the course of time, the Jews will end up teaching Torah. They're Lamed Ben Torah Barabin. It's going to be huge. It's going to be people going to be teaching in stadium with 20, 30,000 seats in them. Amr Yitzchak, Lashem, Zu Pamayas, the city of Lashem, it's a city in Shevet Dan, is the same synonymous as the city of Pamayas. So Ekron Te'aker, and here we see the pasuk referenced again by Rabbi Yitzchak. Zuke Sarbas Adam, she has a metropolitan Shalmalachim. It was metropolitan Shalmalachim. It was considered a metropolitan area for kings. We don't know what that means. A couple of pshatim. Some say that a lot of kings ended up coming from there. And some say that the kings were built there. They weren't necessarily only born there, but that's where they were established from. And we're going to stop right here. So wishing you all a beautiful day.